My favorite story really from the Bible, the book of Job from the Hebrew Scriptures, the story of a good man who finds himself inexplicably cursed. All his flocks die, his family dies. He finds himself living on a dung heap at the edge of town, covered with oozing sores, and he can't figure out why this is happening. His friends arrive, trying to explain to him that this is God's will, that this is happening, and surely he must have sinned, and as a result this is just, and so on and so forth. And Job is having none of it, not the patient Job of legend. He, in fact, demands over and over again that God appear and explain himself. Why has this thing happened? Be careful what you wish for. God does appear, speaking out of a tornado. And it is a remarkable, remarkable lecture. He says to Job, "You've challenged me to come here and explain what's happened to you. If you're so smart, you tell me, where do I keep the storms? Can you whistle up a blizzard? Do you tell the proud waves, this far you shall come and no further?" He goes on and on like this for 3 chapters. And at the end of them, Job basically says, "Sorry I asked. Can I sit down now?" Job is small in the face of something very large, blooming, beautiful, cruel, mysterious, buzzing, this extraordinary planet in this extraordinary universe. And for Job, that appears to be enough to have been reminded of his spot here. The justice of his fate is never explained to him, simply that something very large is happening. And if you think about it, that's pretty much always been the human posture in relation to those forces around us. We're small and they are large. The storms, the ocean, the things that made our lives for millennia difficult, challenging, powerful, real. We've always been small until fairly recently, until really the lifetimes of some of us in this room. It was in the middle of the last century that we first began to get this sense of our new scale. Oppenheimer, when he watched the first explosion at Alamogordo, he said, quoting from the Gita, "We are become as gods, destroyers of worlds." Suddenly humans were very big. The human imagination, because it saw the hideous examples at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, has been able to understand that dropping atomic weapons is a bad idea to be avoided, and we have avoided it. So far, however, the human imagination has been unable to imagine that the explosions of 1 billion pistons in 1 billion cylinders every minute of every hour of every day could produce damage on the same scale. But that, of course, is what's now happening as we rapidly warm the planet, as we rapidly melt its poles, as we rapidly extinguish its forests, on and on. This time last year, oceanographer friends of mine started calling me and emailing me and saying, "Look, there's something bad going on in the data. The slow, steady, painful rise in the temperature of the ocean was suddenly spiking to places we'd never seen and at amplitudes we'd never seen before. By June, it had reached the point where ocean buoys off the Florida coast were recording the highest temperatures in the sea we've ever seen. Week after week, some of those buoys were recording temperatures of 101 degrees Fahrenheit in the ocean, which is what you would set a hot tub at. It's never been that hot in the ocean. By June, that heat had come onshore decisively. Those days last year broke every record. These were the hottest days on this planet in at least 125,000 years. No civilization that we would recognize as a civilization has lived in a climatic regime like the one we are now producing, and we get some sense of what that feels like. Warm air holds more water vapor than cold. If you wanted one fact to understand this century, that would be it. That means that in arid areas you get more evaporation and more drought and more fire. You will recall that by last summer we were all sucking smoke pouring out of the boreal forests of Canada, which saw fires 3 and 4 times the size that had ever been witnessed before. But once that water vapor is up in the atmosphere, it's going to come down, and it comes down increasingly in deluge. And we, of course, got our taste of that last summer when Vermont had the biggest rainstorms in its history. No country will ever come close to producing greenhouse gases on the scale that we have. We're in now the rapids right above the waterfall, and we are surging towards true cataclysm. 2024 so far has been warmer than 2023. We're headed, despite our pledges at Paris 8 years ago to try and hold the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we're on a trajectory now to let the temperature rise about 3 degrees Celsius, 5 or 6 degrees Fahrenheit, globally averaged. If that happens, we will not have civilizations like the ones we are used to having. That's too much violent chaos and flux. The UN estimates that that would produce someplace between 1 billion and 3 billion climate refugees on this planet. Look at what 1 million refugees on our southern border or on the border of Europe managed to do to the politics of our country or of Europe, at the ugliness that it produced. Now multiply that by 1,000 and try to imagine that world. Our job is to somehow desperately figure out how to arrest that rise in temperature, hold it, not stop global warming, it's too late for that, but stop it short of the place where it cuts civilization off at the knees. And the good news is, and it is good news, that we understand at least part of what we need now to accomplish that task. Over the last decade or so, the world's scientists and engineers have given us an extraordinary gift. They've dropped the price of renewable energy on this planet by about 90%, where the cheapest way to produce power is to point a sheet of glass at the sun, and the second cheapest way is to catch the breeze in a windmill. Those are miracles. Water into wine kind of miracles, Hogwarts scale magic, okay? And they allow us to imagine a world where we moved with enormous speed and dispatch to put out the fires that have been burning on this planet for the last 300 years, the fires of coal and gas and oil that brought us modernity, but also brought us this plague, this existential risk of climate change, to put those out and replace them with the power that comes from the burning sun 93 million miles away. We can catch its rays directly on those panels. We can take advantage of the fact that it differentially heats the earth, producing the winds that turn those turbines. We can, if I were in a Methodist church, I might say, we could replace energy from hell with energy from heaven. We can and we should. And we should do it right now, because this is a timed test. If we don't do it fast, it won't matter. The world's climate scientists have told us we need to cut emissions in half by 2030 to have any hope of reaching those targets we set in Paris. Even if everybody on this planet was working in good faith, it would be an extraordinarily difficult task. The sad truth is not everybody is working in good faith. The fossil fuel industry in particular continues to be an absolute obstacle to change, moving at every opportunity to prevent us from making this transition. They have for many years spread denial and disinformation about climate change. By now, that's almost impossible to do. There have been too many floods and fires. Too many people have seen with their own eyes. So now the denial and the disinformation is about things like wind power and solar power, that it's not ready, that it can't work, that it gives you cancer, and on and on and on. And so, first job one by far, is to replace fossil energy with renewable energy. It's cheaper. The world would be a cheaper place to operate if it ran on renewable energy. That's why Exxon hates it so much and works so hard to stop it. I mean, the CEO of Exxon gave an interview last week in which he said quite explicitly, we will not be doing any renewable energy because it does not produce above average returns for our investors, our shareholders. He's right, it doesn't produce above average returns because Exxon doesn't have a monopoly on the sun the way they do on their oil and gas reserves that they control. So they want to keep doing what they do. Our job is to break their political power and replace their technology. And so, those of us who aren't scientists and engineers capable of producing the next great innovations in solar power need to play our part, which is to figure out how to stand up to that industry and how to make this change happen fast. We shouldn't really, on a logical, rational world, have to do that. I mean, I've gone to jail a dozen times now probably for trying to stop pipelines and so on and so forth. And each time I'm in handcuffs, I think to myself, damn, this is stupid. Why am I have to do this in order to make our leaders pay attention to physics, you know? This does not make sense, but sometimes that's what it takes. Not necessarily going to jail. Not everybody has to go to jail, but everybody has to figure out how to get outside their comfort zone some and push, because the planet is a mile outside its comfort zone, and the people who have to live on that planet, who have to deal with the epic heat waves that now come each spring to Asia and Africa, they are so far outside their comfort zone that it's almost impossible. Let me conclude by saying who it is in particular that I think should be at the absolute forefront of this work. Let me tell you first who is at the forefront of this work right now, and that is young people. And that's who I've spent most of my life organizing with. I started 350.org with 7 college students over at Middlebury, and it turned into the first global grassroots climate campaign. We've organized 20,000 demonstrations in every country on earth except North Korea. We also organized this vast fossil fuel divestment campaign. It's become the biggest anti-corporate campaign in history. We're at about $40 trillion now in endowments and portfolios and pension funds that have divested. Young people did that divestment work on college campuses, thousands of college campuses around the country, which is why Harvard and Princeton and UVM and Middlebury and Oxford and Cambridge and so on are on that list of places that have sold their stocks in coal and gas and oil. But when they graduated, they wanted to keep working, and so they did. They formed this thing called the Sunrise Movement. And the Sunrise Movement brought us the Green New Deal. And the Green New Deal, the Inflation Reduction Act, which provides the first real slug of money for making this transition. You have young people to thank for that, those young people from the Sunrise Movement. But at a certain point, I heard one too many people my age say to me, oh, it's up to the next generation to solve these problems, which struck me both as ignoble and also highly impractical. Because for all their energy and intelligence and idealism, young people lack the structural power to make change on the scale that we need in the time that we have by themselves. We do not have time for them to grow up and become senators and CEOs. We have to move rapidly, which means that people with structural power have to figure out how to back them up. And so as I looked around the country and the world for people with structural power, I increasingly focused on people with hairlines like mine. There are 70 million Americans over the age of 60. Not only are there a lot of us, we punch above our weight politically because we all vote. There is no known way to stop old people from voting. Okay? And not only that, we ended up with most of the resources. Fair or not, the boomers and the silent generation above them have about 70% of the country's wealth, compared with about 5% for millennials. So if you want to push around Wall Street or Washington or Montpelier, and I'd like to push around all three, then it helps to have some people of a certain age. That's why we started this group Third Act 2 years ago, to organize for progressive purposes people over the age of 60. If you're in your 60s or 70s or 80s now, your first act was in that period of extraordinary social and political and cultural transformation, when we started taking women seriously in public life, when the apex of the civil rights movement, the first Earth Day in 1970, 20 million Americans, 10% of the then population, were out in the streets that day. Probably the biggest demonstration in American history, and what do you know, it worked. We had the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act and the EPA within a couple of years, and the air got cleaner and so did the water. If you have any doubt about the power of those moments, look at what the Supreme Court went after in its retrograde rampage of the last 2 years. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Gun Control Act of 1968, the Clean Air Act of 1971, and Roe v. Wade 1973. We had the privilege of living in the world shaped by these things our whole lives, and now we need to defend them in the ways that we still can. So Third Act has been taken off like a shot, and I hope very much that some of you will go to thirdact.org and check it out and join up so you can join with us. And it's been extraordinary fun to work with young people to back them up. One of the big campaigns we have run is against the banks, Citibank, Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, that are the biggest funders of the fossil fuel industry. Young people came to us a couple of years ago, Fridays for the Future, the American arm of Greta's movement, said, we want to take these banks on, but we don't have credit cards, we don't have checking accounts, can you help? We were like, sure. And so we've joined together in demonstration after demonstration. I remember the very first one I helped organize in Boston. There were 200 or 300 high school kids there, because there always are. They understand what they're staring down the barrel of, and they're somewhat sprier, so they were at the head of the march. But at the back of the march, there was a big group of us with a banner that said, "Fossils against fossil fuels." And we have gone on in the same spirit. Last March, we organized on the same day 100 demonstrations in 100 cities outside those banks. And in a lot of places, we shut them down with civil disobedience for the day. I was in Washington, where there were several thousand of us, too old now to comfortably sprawl on the sidewalk for several hours at a time. So we'd been to the Goodwill in the Washington area and got every rocking chair that we could find. And that's what we shut them down with. The Times had a big story the next morning that said, "Rocking chair rebellion underway." So we invite you to join and to take part, not with any guarantee that we are going to win this fight, because we do not know. Dr. King used to end his speeches by saying the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, which I think translates into this may take a while, but we're going to win. The arc of the physical universe is short and it bends toward heat. If we do not win soon, we will not win, and at the moment we are losing. That's what it means when the rainforest starts catching on fire. So I cannot guarantee you a victory. I can guarantee you only that as you take this fight on, you will be in the company of people from around the world doing what they can to make themselves a little bit smaller, to reduce the scale somewhat of our impact on the world around us, in the hope that we too might someday be able to do what Job did and sort of sit down and just appreciate the glory and the majesty of the world into which we were lucky to be born. Thank you all very much.